Episode 4 deliberately abandons the adrenaline of catastrophe and replaces it with something far more punishing. The explosion is no longer the focus. The reactor has been contained, at least in the immediate sense. The fires are controlled. The graphite is cleared. The divers have done their work. The miners have dug their tunnel. Yet instead of relief, the episode delivers permanence. What it communicates, slowly and without comfort, is that Chernobyl is not a crisis that ends. It is a condition that persists. Earlier episodes revolved around escalation. The question was how bad it could get. Episode 4 shifts the question to how long it will last. The disaster is reframed not as an event in time, but as a transformation of space. Entire regions are declared exclusion zones. Maps are redrawn. Villages are emptied not temporarily, but indefinitely. The show makes clear that this is not something that will be repaired next year, or even in a generation. The contamination will outlive the people who caused it. The land itself has been rewritten. That permanence strips away the last illusion of victory. There was tension in preventing a second explosion. There was urgency in draining the water, in clearing the roof, in cooling the core. Those operations had stakes that felt dynamic. Episode 4 offers no such narrative momentum. Instead, it presents management. Endless, repetitive, incremental management. The heroism of singular missions dissolves into the monotony of cleanup. Cleanup becomes the dominant reality. Men in protective suits patrol empty streets. Trucks spray decontaminating chemicals over soil that can never fully return to its prior state. Measurements are taken constantly. Numbers are logged. Contamination levels are reduced by fractions, not eliminated. There is no applause for this work. No cinematic framing that elevates it into something grand. It is labour without emotional reward, necessary and uncelebrated. The absence of spectacle is intentional. Earlier episodes allowed moments that could be interpreted as brave stands against overwhelming odds. Episode 4 dismantles that interpretation. There is no saving the reactor now. There is only mitigation. The people involved are not preventing apocalypse. They are maintaining a wound, and maintenance is exhausting. It lacks drama. It demands endurance rather than courage in a singular burst. The environmental dimension deepens the tragedy. The forests surrounding the plant are no longer backdrops. They are casualties. The soil is contaminated. The trees absorb radiation. Wildlife roams through poisoned terrain. Nature is no longer depicted as something pristine or resilient. It is rendered fragile, permanently altered by human failure. The disaster extends beyond industry and politics into ecosystems that cannot consent or protest. Animals become the most haunting symbol of this transformation. Pets left behind in evacuated towns wander through empty streets, unaware that their homes are now lethal zones. The state responds not with compassion, but with protocol. Soldiers are assigned to eliminate them, to prevent the spread of contamination. The killing is not dramatized as cruelty, nor is it framed as heroic mercy. It is presented as administrative necessity. That framing is precisely what makes it devastating. Violence is bureaucratized. Orders are given. Lists are followed. Shots are fired. The episode lingers just long enough to prevent emotional detachment. The dogs approach soldiers seeking familiarity. The sound of gunfire echoes through deserted neighbourhoods. There is no swelling music to reframe the act as noble. The discomfort is deliberate. The viewer is forced to confront the collateral damage of containment policies. What lingers is not the act itself, but the emotional residue. The soldiers follow orders because they must. They understand the reasoning. They comply, but obedience does not erase impact. The episode pays attention to the silence afterward, to hesitation, to the way the work accumulates internally. It suggests that trauma does not always come from disobedience or chaos. It can arise from dutiful compliance. This becomes one of the episode's most potent themes, the emotional cost of obedience. The men involved are not rebels. They are not questioning authority openly. They are carrying out directives designed to minimize long-term harm, and yet the weight of those actions settles on them. The show implies that psychological damage can coexist with institutional loyalty. Doing what is required does not protect the individual from consequence. The pacing reinforces this erosion. Episode 4 is slower, heavier. The rhythm lacks urgency. Scenes extend into quiet observation. Conversations are subdued. The narrative mirrors exhaustion rather than suspense. It is as if the show itself is tired. That fatigue becomes part of the experience. The audience feels the drag of ongoing consequence. There is no climactic release, only continuation. Ulana Komyuk's investigative thread shifts the moral focus even further. The question is no longer confined to the night of the explosion. It expands backward. How was this reactor designed? Who approved it? Who concealed its flaws? The disaster begins to look less like an isolated mistake and more like a structural inevitability. The blame broadens from individuals to systems, from operators to architects of policy. This reframing is critical. It transforms Chernobyl from an accident into a manifestation of accumulated negligence. The problem was not merely a button pressed incorrectly. It was a culture that prioritized secrecy over safety, a design that hid instability beneath assurances. Episode 4 begins peeling back those layers. It suggests that the explosion was the visible symptom of deeper dysfunction. Legasov's presence reflects this mounting weight. In earlier episodes, he functioned as the voice of scientific clarity, calm, methodical, focused on containment. Now there is erosion. He carries knowledge that cannot be undone. He understands that the land will remain poisoned. He understands the reactor's design flaws. His calculations are no longer about immediate crisis, but about long-term contamination and historical accountability. The burden becomes existential rather than operational. Perhaps the most devastating element of Episode 4 is its removal of catharsis. Even when a plan works, there is no sense of restoration. Villages remain empty, animals are gone, forests are contaminated. The exclusion zone becomes a permanent scar on the map. Survival exists, but it feels stripped of dignity. The beauty of the environment is replaced with warning signs and checkpoints. The episode insists on this discomfort. It refuses to romanticize endurance. It refuses to suggest that perseverance alone redeems catastrophe. Some damage cannot be reversed. Some mistakes linger across generations. Episode 4 forces the viewer to sit with that reality. By its end, Chernobyl is no longer a singular disaster. It is a landscape of consequence, a reminder that technological failure can imprint itself onto geography and memory in ways that outlast human lifespans. The explosion may have lasted seconds, the cleanup will last decades, and the emotional cost for those who carried it out may last forever. The execution of Episode 4 is intentionally abrasive. It removes the scaffolding of suspense and replaces it with attrition. Where previous installments used urgency to generate tension, this chapter uses repetition, discomfort, and moral friction. It is structured to make the viewer sit in aftermath rather than anticipate escalation. The horror is no longer what might happen. It is what has already happened and will not be undone. The animal liquidation sequences are perhaps the clearest example of this strategy. They are prolonged just enough to deny emotional escape. The camera does not cut away immediately after a gunshot. It lingers on empty streets, on the sound of boots moving through deserted neighbourhoods, on the uneasy silence between soldiers. The show understands that this is not spectacle, it is consequence. The animals are not villains, nor are they metaphors dressed up for melodrama. They are collateral damage rendered visible. What makes these scenes so effective is their refusal to dramatise moral debate. No one delivers a speech about necessity. No one justifies the act with patriotic fervour. The orders are given plainly. The logic is clinical. Contaminated animals may spread radioactive particles beyond the exclusion zone. Therefore, they must be eliminated. The reasoning is structurally sound. The emotional impact is devastating. The episode forces the audience to confront the gap between rational policy and human empathy. The tonal shift from urgency to exhaustion is equally deliberate. Episode 4 feels slower because it is supposed to feel slower. The pacing mirrors burnout. Cleanup crews move methodically. Soldiers repeat tasks. Scientists pore over documents rather than rush toward new crises. The narrative weight settles into something heavy and sustained. There are no countdown clocks now, only routines. This exhaustion becomes thematic. Catastrophe management is not cinematic. It is administrative. It demands stamina rather than adrenaline. The show mirrors this by stretching moments that would normally be abbreviated. A patrol through an abandoned village lasts longer than comfortable. A decontamination effort is shown in detail. The viewer begins to feel the drag. That drag is intentional. It communicates that containment is a marathon, not a climax. Ulana Komyuk's investigative arc shifts the conversation from aftermath to origin. Her pursuit of documentation reframes the disaster. The focus is no longer limited to operational mistakes. It expands to design decisions, to hidden flaws, to suppressed warnings. The question becomes systemic rather than personal. Who built a reactor with unstable characteristics? Who concealed that instability? Who prioritized image over safety? This shift is critical because it dismantles the narrative of isolated error. Episode 4 suggests inevitability. The reactor did not simply malfunction because of one reckless test. It functioned within a culture that discouraged transparency, a system that punished dissent, a structure that valued authority over expertise. The blame widens. It becomes architectural. Legasov's portrayal deepens this weight. In earlier episodes, his composure functioned as a stabilizing force. Now it feels like strain. He carries knowledge that extends beyond physics into accountability. He understands that the flaw in the reactor's design was known, minimized, obscured. His calculations are no longer limited to radiation spread. They are tied to truth, and truth in this context is dangerous. The emotional erosion is subtle but evident. Legasov is not shouting. He is not unraveling publicly. Instead, there is a quiet heaviness. He understands that the contamination cannot be reversed. He understands that the narrative being shaped politically may diverge from reality. The burden of irreversible knowledge isolates him. The episode's final thematic maneuver is perhaps its most devastating. It removes any illusion of victory. Even when cleanup operations succeed, the mood does not lift. Villages remain empty. Forests remain poisoned. The exclusion zone becomes permanent. There is no celebratory declaration that Europe has been saved. There is only acknowledgement that the worst-case scenario was delayed. Survival is portrayed as stripped of beauty. It is functional, transactional. The land is cordoned off. Lives are disrupted indefinitely. The success is statistical, not emotional. The viewer is denied catharsis because catharsis would imply closure. Episode 4 insists that closure does not exist here. In its execution, the episode embraces discomfort as message. It refuses spectacle. It rejects triumphant framing. It forces the audience to sit with permanence, bureaucracy, and erosion. The disaster has moved from explosive crisis to enduring scar. And the show makes no attempt to soften that reality.